everyone, I hope you're well. I just want to say a few things today about beauty. Beautiful bodies is the chapter that I would like you to read. And then gendered bodies. Those two things and those two chapters overlap quite a bit, so I've decided to combine them. Now, I could say lots of things about this topic, but I'm only going to say a few things, and then I'm going to let you read the chapters and explore a little bit on your own, just because actually all of these topics I could go on and on about. I find them very interesting, but I will just kind of keep it a little constrained, so as not to burden you with too much to watch and read. So a couple of things about beauty. She starts out saying, is there a biological imperative? Is there some kind of biological reasoning behind who we find attractive and why we find them attractive? Really, she's asking, is there a natural cause for finding some people desirable and other people not desirable? Is there something we could say is universal? And there is some evidence that yes, there are certain things, qualities that all people are drawn to, but for the most part, she will say, just like disability or race or any number of things, beauty is also very heavily socially constructed. And she wants to point out that this kind of pressure to look beautiful, she also mentions looking younger, that this kind of youth kind of fits into it too, that those things fall particularly heavily on women. I don't think that comes as a surprise to anyone. What is a little maybe surprising is that this is happening more to men now. There's more pressure on men to look a certain way. And she does talk about something she calls the Adonis complex. And she says, men have this pressure to have big muscles and be sort of taller than they are or seem tall, and just generally have this physical prowess about them. Men are urged to be bigger and women are urged to be smaller, is the kind of general trend. And this varies, of course, over time. In certain cultures, it's different. So she talks about that too, quite a bit, and it's interesting. So do read it. What she says about beauty for women, though, is she says that for women, no matter how talented you are, no matter how many degrees you get, no matter how many patents you get registered for your inventions, no matter how many books you write, you will always at some level be found wanting, she says, because of this idea of, but is she beautiful enough? Is she thin enough? Is she this enough or that enough? And that it goes to such an extreme, and she talks about how, but I think you already know how. Diet, exercise, makeup, hair, nails, eyelashes, on and on, that it goes to such an extreme that, and she says this thing which is quite interesting to me. She says, because fertility or youth is a very big part of this beauty culture that surrounds us, women will always fail, right? So they will fail in the sense that, or they're made to feel that they're failing. They're made to feel that way, again, no matter how accomplished they are. If they are, it's always kind of like, well, yes, but, what about her? She really has, this or that about her that she should fix or change. There's that, but there's also the fact that every day we get older. So in that sense, we will fail. We won't, even if we do resemble some kind of an ideal, that will not always be the case. That is changing, and it will change. So there's kind of a sense in which women cannot really win, and they also but they're also constantly judged very, very harshly in a way that we just don't really do with men. She talks about how beautiful women will marry men who are quite plain, not even necessarily wealthy, although she does talk about wealth for men and that being kind of seen as attractive. But women just don't judge that harshly. They don't judge men that harshly by their appearance. Now, maybe some of the men out there are thinking, I disagree, and I'm sure to some extent you probably do feel judged by women in regard to your appearance, but and I don't mean to discredit that or discount that, because I do think it's an issue, but you are not. I think men are not certainly not in the same way observed, kind of constantly observed, and then judged, and then defined by her weight or her youth or her hair or her face or whatever. This doesn't happen to nearly the same extent. So the point there is, no matter what you do, women are going to fail, and if not for any other reason than that you're getting older. So that's not a nice feeling. Also, this presence of beauty, she says, we see so many images all the time that we're surrounded by beauty. We're surrounded by images that we cannot really replicate, in part, she says, because even the most attractive models, the most famous models, the highest paid models, don't look like they do in the images. They are always photoshopped. There's pretty much no such thing as a photo that goes out that hasn't had some kind of retouching, unless they're doing it, on purpose. Look, we're putting in natural beauty, but even that is still, it's always within certain constraints, and it's always still pretty traditionally attractive, right? So she says that this creates something called contrast effect. So she says men in places like Los Angeles, where there are lots of models and actresses and beautiful people in general, the presence of these people makes men, and probably women too, but makes men feel like their regular partners are not attractive enough by comparison, so in contrast to, and that's why this contrast effect. So they might become a little bit dissatisfied with their own partners. Why don't, and not even necessarily consciously, but why don't you look like these, supermodels a little bit? And this introduces kind of some discord or dissatisfaction, and relationships can suffer because of it, she says, because of this contrast effect. But even if you don't live in New York City or Los Angeles, where there are lots of beautiful people everywhere, you are still surrounded, and so are men, of course, surrounded by beauty. We are in the presence of beauty nonstop. And that in itself has this kind of contrast effect for partners choosing mates, but also clearly for people themselves. And she also says that this is important for capitalism to keep going, to perpetuate itself, right? If people were happy and they felt attractive and good, then they would not buy anything. So she also talks about the enormous amounts of money that go into pharmaceuticals and cosmetic surgery, and on and on and on, and how these things really promote feeling inadequate, right? You just kind of always feel a little bit inadequate. Try to imagine the last time, maybe I'm projecting my stuff onto you guys, but try to remember the last time you woke up and you're like, I'm so cute, I'm great, I'm talented, strong, whatever, off I go into the world, and felt that way for 24 hours at a time. I can't remember the last time that happened to me that I didn't have some kind of like, yeah, but what about this? Or you got to do this, or, you suck at this. It's just kind of, so again, we all do that. We all have that, but it's partly pressure from outside to feel inadequate, and for women, it just so happens to fall on beauty, on these beauty standards, until she says women kind of get into this trap that they can't really get out of, or feel that way, right? She also talks about whiteness, and it's very much like in the racialized bodies chapter from last time. I spoke about how colonialism and the slave trade very much sort of create the idea of race and then give it meaning by making some kind of social structure around it or on top of it. And so if races are created to, or the idea of race is created to divide and then rank, right? So she says it's a method of division and inequality. Then whiteness, right, has to kind of be affirmed or created itself, or made to seem superior. So she has a whole list of things that's kind of interesting, back all the way to Queen Elizabeth I. You may have seen images of her, or I guess representations of her, where she has white paint on her face, because apparently the whiter you were, the more elite and more powerful and more beautiful that you were considered. So, and it has something to do with the fact that you are demonstrating to everyone that you don't have to work outside, right? The regular people, the peasants, the non-royalty, the non-royals have to, work in the fields probably, whereas you don't have to go outside at all, and that is why you are very pale. So that's partly where that comes from. I had a friend in England who said the opposite, which is interesting. So Elizabeth I, but then hundreds of years later, she said when she was a little girl, if people went somewhere and they got a tan on like the school holidays, so spring break or something like that, they came back and they were darker, then you knew that they were posh, like they had money, because they had enough money to go somewhere far away from England, which doesn't have a lot of sunlight, somewhere far away from England, somewhere far south, and also to lay about and get all of this color and then come back. And so it was kind of a status symbol to have a tan then. But so again, you can see how these things change and how skin tone means something different in different settings. And the reason that I say that is to just suggest that because it's so changing and changeable, we can do better. We can change it, right? That's kind of the whole point, really, of saying things are not natural. There's not a natural connection between the slave trade and people from Africa. That happened in a contingent way, which means just accidentally, historically, it just so happened to have happened that way, but it can be changed. Same thing with gender. Gender is pretty important for, all kinds of things. It is something that you are assigned even before you are born, right? So even before you're born, you're in utero, and if the parents know your sex, which usually they do now, I think it's rare to say we wanted to be surprised. Everyone is already waiting for a girl or waiting for a boy, and they will paint the nursery and buy the clothes and all of that based on your gender or your what the gender is supposed to be. And again, we go all the way back again to a binary construction, right? There are boys and there are girls, period. And we have a lot invested in that kind of binary, right? And whenever anyone begins to challenge those categories, oftentimes people get very nervous. there is a woman, if ever you study gender in more depth, or women's studies, you go to grad school or something like that, you will hear of a woman called Judith Butler. Judith Butler is very famous in gender theory, in gender studies, because she basically came up with this way to understand gender, which at the time was quite revolutionary. It might have worked its way into the culture, so it doesn't seems a bit obvious to you now, but at the time it was quite startling. She said that there's nothing inside of you that you are expressing for gender. Like we think, oh, well, I have a Y chromosome or I don't, and I'm just being girly. It's just coming out of me. I'm girly or I'm manly or whatever. And she says there is nothing coming out. There's nothing inside, right? Except for yes, a chromosome, yes, cells, yes, some organs and blood, but that's it. Everything else, all of gender is, she says, a performance. So it's kind of like it's made up of all of these cues, all of these hand gestures, all of these things that we do with our hair and our clothes, and the way that we interact with each other, and the way that we carry our bodies, and the way that we what we expect of ourselves, how we treat each other as girls or as boys. It's a whole universe of things that are culturally constructed, she would say, and it's kind of like a performance. She does a little bit with drag shows. So she says, you watch a drag show, it's fun, there's a lot of spectacle, it's lively, it's great, people are beautiful. It is a show, that it is a performance, and at some level that, or you kind of compute, well, these people were born male and they are performing as females. But she wants to say, I am performing as a female too. All females are performing as females. Males are performing as males. They're carrying out these behaviors and these scripts, really, that can certainly be changed if we feel a little bit tyrannized by them. What is for example, she gives a few examples. She talks about a woman. Okay, here it is. Here's what it is. Anytime, we will all say, well, of course you should be able, if you're a girl, you should be able to, play football if you want to, or climb a tree if you want to, and we even have a name for that. That's a tomboy, right? And that's cute, so long as she grows out of it, kind of thing. Or guys can do hair or play with dolls, but as long as it's kind of a phase. And we even when we're all grown up, it's kind of like, well, here's another thing that Judith Butler says. She says, and this is a different article, but she says, and the first one's a book, and this one's an article, but she says, when you are at, and she's also talking about drag, when you're at the drag show, you're having a great time, you love it, it's fun, and then, but she says, but then, if a couple weeks later, you're on a bus, and a person who is has cross-dressed, so now someone comes on the bus, it looks like a man wearing women's clothing, in drag, I guess you would, but not exactly, and sits down next to you, you feel anxious. You suddenly feel like, okay, I don't know what to do. I don't know how. I don't know what's happening. I don't know if this person is, stable, or, do you know what I'm saying? And she says this is because if gender, even cross-dressing, even transgender, even thing, we get it when it is a category that we can understand, right? So when we're at a drag show, we know what's happening, and we affirm it. We like it. It's entertaining. But she's saying when it happens any other time, it's kind of like, whoa, I'm confused now. I don't know what to do now. I feel uncomfortable now. So it's not as if, so she says all of our feeling about gender, even when we know it should be okay to, and we probably act in many ways that are considered masculine or considered feminine despite what our gender is, even though we know, yes, it's a spectrum, it's not a binary, it's not yes or no, this or that. When someone really does challenge gender big time, it is scary. And she says because we don't think of it as a performance. We think of it as so someone who isn't gender conforming, we feel like that must be bad. That must be an illness or some kind of deviation that we can't really contain. Whereas at a drag show, you know what's happening. I think maybe I told that story too long, but one example that she brings up is this woman who has facial hair, right? This is not that uncommon. It's called hirsutism, but it happens. But this woman in I think she's in Pakistan does not take it off, right? Doesn't take off this facial hair. She leaves it there, and the reason why is because she's Sikh, and Sikh, S-I-K-H, in Sikh religion, you don't cut your hair. Men don't cut their hair, women don't cut their hair. So never, ever in your life do you cut your hair. So everyone's hair has grown quite long. Men oftentimes will wrap their hair in a bun, a man bun, I guess, but the original man bun, and they will wrap cloth around it to hold it in place, a turban. So she has a turban, she has very long hair, but she hasn't taken the facial hair off. And someone accidentally photographed her. She ended up on Reddit, and then, as you can imagine, people were all, oh. And she wrote back, and you'll see this in the chapter, and she basically shamed everyone and just said, I am a creature of God. I don't take hair off, but why do I need to? Why does it matter? And this is interesting because part of us thinks it would be so easy for you to just remove it. There's cream, there are razors, just remove it, and then you wouldn't have any problem. No one would be ridiculing you. You wouldn't be on Reddit, and there's this uproar. And this is interesting because it's the same thing with Carrie Burnell. Only one of you pointed this out, but it's a really good point, I think. She did not want a prosthesis, and she could very easily have put on a prosthesis and kind of passed, passed as an able-bodied person, so that you didn't really notice. She didn't draw attention to herself. She had a fake hand, but she's like, I don't need a fake hand. I don't want one. I don't want to wear a prosthesis. Same thing with this woman. Yeah, I've got facial hair. I don't want to take it off. So it's kind of like, we're very invested in gender norms, to the point where even if we wanted to just really rebel, it's kind of like, but is it really worth all of the conflict that I'm going to bring up with my family, or is it worth all the conflict? And it's not even outright conflict. Butler and these other people talk about how it's just a system of rewards and punishments. So if you do something, and I'm running out of time, I just want to tell you this one thing about Frida Kahlo, because she's a hero of mine. She showed up to a family portrait dressed as a man. So she had her hair slicked down, she was wearing a man's suit, and she had kind of a mustache drawn on her face. And there's this portrait of her with her smiling family around her. But can you imagine doing that yourself? Can you imagine if your family said, hey, we're doing a big portrait, get ready, wear something nice, and be here at whatever time, and you showed up cross-dressed? can you imagine the uproar? Everyone would be like, what are you doing? We're trying to do a pic. What's going on in your head? So it's kind of like, it's just a lot of trouble, and it's much easier it takes less energy to just conform, just conform. I'll tell you some other stuff later, actually, because it's getting on time where I have to go to a meeting. I did this on purpose so that I wouldn't talk for a million years and you wouldn't get bored. Do read carefully the beautiful bodies chapter and the gendered bodies chapter. I think it has a lot to do with things that you guys go through, and it's not only about women. I'm sorry that I've only talked about women, because men are definitely affected too. She also talks about how men engage in behaviors like we expect them to, that are very dangerous and make them die earlier. She said, for example, joining the military, fighting in the military, fighting with other people, binge drinking, reckless driving, competitive sports. All of these things have a high risk of injury and a high risk of death. But if you're not doing them, we feel like you're not being manly, right? You're not doing your gendered expectations any favors. But think too, if you do the very most gendered thing you can think of, you would probably get rewards for that, if only through approbation from your families. So it's a system. It's not just, we can say, I'd rather be more male-like, or I'd rather do some things that are considered female. We can do that, but there's such a profound system of rewards through approval if you do conform to gender norms, and so much struggle and stress and problem if you don't conform, that most of us just don't really think about it. It seems natural, we do what we do, but it is important to think about these things and examine them, and analyze them and think critically about them. So go and do that now.